Hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the Big EI event. My name is Liliana Diaz-Vasquez and I am a bilingual English-Spanish speaking speech-language pathologist, also known as Bilingual Speechie here on Instagram. This is my second year participating in this event, so I'm super happy to be back and talking to you guys about bilingualism and raising bilingual children. Based on your feedback, you guys had asked me all sorts of questions about raising bilingual children, and I decided to integrate your questions into today's presentation. A lot of the information that I will be talking to you guys about today is based on my experience as a new bilingual mom. For those of you guys that don't know, I just recently had a baby in June, and I have been learning a lot. I will say that it's so different learning, textbook information versus actually applying it and being a parent. It's so different, textbook versus reality, and I think you'll see that a lot reflected in my latest posts on Instagram. But I will be talking to you guys about how that process has developed for me, being a bilingual parent, and how I came across developing the plan for my family and our goals today during the presentation. But before I start, I do want to say that make sure you have your worksheet. Becky from the SLT scrapbook was super nice and put together a bunch of worksheets for the presentations for all of the Big EI event. So you will find all of the information that I'm talking about today on the worksheet. So make sure you download that. You can head over to Becky's Instagram and get the link so that you can download all of the information. And I believe it's only available for 2 weeks. So make sure you get that info because I will not be sending millions of emails later on, sending the worksheet later. So make sure you get that. So before we, dive into tips on raising bilingual children and just what my recommendations are, I wanted to talk about the benefits of being bilingual. And I'm going to kind of go through the information that's on the worksheet. There's so many benefits to being bilingual or multilingual, from, career advancements, benefits to health benefits. We know that there are benefits to our cognition. There have been studies done where it has shown that bilingual people have better memory function, cognitive function, being bilingual. And I believe I do have a visual for free download on my website that you guys can take a look at. It is a visual of the brain. Let me see if I could pull it up here really quickly. It's called The Anatomy of the Brain. It looks like this. And on here I outline all of the amazing benefits to being bilingual. And as I mentioned, it includes great inhibitory control skills, faster at switching between tasks, improved memory skills, better at processing information, being able to connect with others in deeper ways, being able to just improve your personal life and communicate with a variety of people are just some of the benefits of being bilingual. I know, in my personal experience, I've been able to connect with more families, work with more students, just by being able to speak Spanish. And I definitely have experienced kind of those pros in my career, being able to share my knowledge with you guys, being bilingual as well. So I always tell parents, that there's so many pros to being bilingual, and honestly, I don't think there's any cons at all. But yeah, and I think that, moving forward with, raising your child to be bilingual, there are definitely goals that you should keep in mind for yourself, and really ask yourself, why is it, aside from these pros, what else, makes me want to pursue, teaching or exposing my child to another language. And so that brings me to my second point, and that is developing a plan. So once again, just really ask yourself, why is it that you want to expose your child to another language besides the mainstream English? And really kind of sit down and kind of write down, your goals for yourself and what your end goal is for your family. So there are some questions that you should be asking yourself to develop, your plan. And I will say that for me personally, raising, Itzael to be bilingual, one of our big goals was that we want him eventually to communicate with his grandparents. So for us, my husband and I, our parents speak Spanish, and we didn't want there to be a communication gap between his Itzael's grandparents and Itzael. We really wanted them to be able to communicate. So that's one of our big goals as to why we want to really expose him to Spanish. So my husband and I, when I was pregnant, sat down and really talked about our plan and how we were going to communicate in our household going forward. My husband and I, I would say we're both bilingual. We both are sequential bilinguals, meaning we both acquired Spanish first and then later on learned English. And communication with us, between us, is primarily in English. We do a lot of code mixing as well. So I would say it's probably like 80% English, 20% Spanish. We insert a lot of phrases and words in our utterances when we're talking, but I would say the large chunk is definitely in English. Now, one of the things that we did talk about was, okay, if we really want to raise Itzael to be bilingual, we kind of have to shift gears in the way that we're communicating at home. So we talked about, what parenting strategy we might want to pursue going forward. And I'll get into the parenting methods a little later, but first I just kind of want to outline what questions you need to ask yourself to develop the plan. So we had asked ourselves, how fluent do we want Itzael to be in Spanish? And like I said, for us, it's just important for him to be able to communicate with his grandparents. I know that the academic language, he'll probably, won't get as much because, he's getting more so conversational Spanish exposure in the home setting and as well as with like family. And we did talk about, in the future, if we would be interested in bilingual education so that he can achieve that academic exposure to Spanish. And, we do want to do that at some point, but we're not quite there yet, but that's something that we did talk about as well. We also asked whether we're going to be exposing him to Spanish and English simultaneously or sequentially. Is he going to get only Spanish first and then English later in school? And that's where, as I was talking about earlier, where that reality versus textbook really hit me, because in my mind I was so like, you know what, we're gonna do sequential bilingual. He is only gonna get Spanish exposure first and then later acquire English, just kind of how we were raised. And then I quickly realized that that was really hard to achieve. That is not our reality. It's not that easy to do that. And I know in the textbooks it says, speaking only your Spanish language or choosing that parent minority language at home parenting method is the best way to achieve sequential bilinguals, but it doesn't work out that way with us. And so we kind of had to shift gears as well too, with the way we were exposing him, because really my husband and I speak both languages. We're both bilingual, and it's really hard to kind of shut off one language and just stick to one when that's, you know, not the way that we're used to communicating. So in a way, we had to be realistic, and we had to be flexible as well when we're speaking to our son. So now I would say we are definitely doing, I would say like 80% Spanish and 20% English is what, you know, we do throughout the day with him. But that's something that you want to ask yourself too, as part of developing your plan. Another question you want to ask yourself is, do you want your child to eventually, you know, read, write in that other language? Once again, tying into the academic exposure. Do you want your child to be able to read fluently and write fluently in the language? Is that a goal of yours? And if so, you know, how are you going to achieve that goal with your child? For us, like I said, it's not really our end goal for our son. Our goal is just for him to be able to communicate with his grandparents. You know, going off of that, are you going to consider bilingual education if you do want him to or her to read or write in your home language? And then, is your family in agreement with your goals? That one is a big one. A lot of times, you know, we might have that one parent or in the relationship that kind of takes the lead with, you know, making kind of the goals for the family. But this is really a team effort, and you can't be the only one on board with, you know, exposing your child to, let's say, a certain language, because if you are the only one that's working at this, and, you know, your plan might kind of just fall apart if you don't have like a team effort in the household. So as I said, I sat down with my husband. We both were in agreement with, you know, our goals and how we were going to approach things. So I would, you know, really encourage you to talk to your partner as well, and just kind of think about, you know, whether you guys are on the same terms in terms of raising your child. And if your child has exposure to extended family a lot of the time or throughout the day, you might also want to consider talking to them about your goals as well too. And then lastly, how will you combat negative comments? You know, as I said, there are a lot of pros to being bilingual, and a lot of the times it just takes educating the other person as to why, you know, bilingualism is so important. But just be prepared to kind of deal with maybe negative comments about exposing your child to another language. And those negative comments may be, you know, anywhere from, you know, why are you exposing him to another language? You're going to confuse him. And, you know, and just be ready to answer those type or comment on those types of comments and concerns from other family and friends. So then that brings me to the bilingual parenting methods. As I mentioned before, I learned about these in, you know, textbook format, but once I started applying it, I realized that you really have to be flexible. Like, you can't really choose one parenting method and say, okay, you know, this is, I'm going to follow this by the book, because honestly, it doesn't work that way. And I've, you know, come to learn that, you know, being a bilingual mom. So, the parenting methods that there are 4, and not one is better than the other. So just know that you want to do what's best for your family, what fits your dynamic at home. And just keep in mind, you know, you might have to be flexible. Like, you're not probably going to follow these to the T. It's really hard to do that. So the first one is the one parent, one language parenting method. And in this parenting method, in the relationship, let's say one parent speaks English, the other parent speaks Spanish. Each parent sticks to the language that he or she knows and is speaking that 100% of the day. So that is the first parenting method. And like I said, you know, be flexible, like change things according to how your family dynamic might work out at home. The second one is minority language at home. So that one is you're speaking your native language at home with both parents, and that works great if you have a partner who also speaks the same language as you do. And if you do, that is awesome. Then you guys can speak with your child in the home language 100% of the day. The second one is time, or the third one is time, context, and setting dependent. So in this parenting method, your child's primary language varies depending on who they're with and at what time of the day they're with that certain person. So let's say, for example, grandparents speak Spanish, then maybe your child only speaks Spanish and only gets that exposure when they go to grandma or grandpa's house. So that would be time, context dependent. And then the next parenting method is mixed languages. So let's say you and your partner speak, let's say one English, Spanish, or both, and you guys are pretty much using both languages at home throughout the day, and you're not really, sticking more so to one than the other. That would be mixed languages at home. Now, initially, my husband and I wanted to do minority language at home, as I had mentioned, and we wanted to only speak Spanish 100% of the day. And then, as I mentioned, it was just really hard to do that because we're both bilingual and our brains just think in English and in Spanish, and it was really hard to just narrow down to one. I found myself a lot of the times, speaking Spanish and then pausing and saying like, wait, how do you say that word? Or wait, how do you say this? And then, really quickly looking at my phone. So, I just kind of code mix a lot and just kind of keep it natural and, try to do or talk to Itzael, what I'm thinking and saying and how it comes out, and without having to pause and just kind of like ask questions or ask my husband really quickly, like, how do you say this? So with that being said, I feel like we're really in between minority language and mixed languages at home. It's very fluid. We're not really one or the other. We're just kind of going with the flow of things, if that makes sense. And my whole point here being is like, you do you do whatever works best for your family. You don't necessarily have to stick to a parenting method to the T, is what I'm trying to get here. So now, going off of that, let's talk about tips with raising bilingual children. As I mentioned, the first one is be flexible with your child, with yourself. Language is not perfect. Language is really complex, especially when it comes to code mixing, if you guys are bilingual. And if you find yourself code mixing, that is okay. Just do what is natural. Do what is going to provide your child with the best language model. And don't be so hard on yourself. So it's okay if you are code mixing with your child at home. And I always tell my husband, we can code mix and as much as we want. The only time I do kind of like nitpick at things is when my husband sometimes makes up words. And this is normal, like, it's part of that Spanglish culture. And there's nothing wrong with that. I speak Spanglish all the time too. But, that the only time that I'm really nitpicky is when we are using Spanglish words, and it's fine. We'll say the Spanglish word to Itzael, but then I always tell my husband, let's follow it up with the English word or the Spanish word right afterwards. And I think I had posted on Instagram not too long ago, like an example of that. I think he had said, what was it? Oh, burpear, when he was like burping my Itzael, and he combined the word burp and repetir together and made the word burpear. And it's fine. Like I said, he said it and he's like, oh, let's, te vamos a burpear. And then I was like, oh, you mean repetir. And I was like, oh, okay, sí, te vamos a repetir. Without necessarily like correcting my husband, just following it up with the word that, in English or in Spanish, if that makes sense. So, being flexible is probably the biggest thing, and just being okay with code mixing is one of the biggest tips. The next one is, don't compare your child to others. You don't know what kind of family dynamic that other child has. You don't know if maybe, both parents only speak Spanish or only speak whatever other language it may be. And that is why that child, let's say, has the better Spanish, even though, I don't like to use that term, and we shouldn't be using that term because there is no such thing as better Spanish, but I know these are things that other people will say a lot of the times, like, oh, that kid's Spanish is perfect, why can't your Spanish be like that? Or, why is, my son's Spanish not as good as that kid's Spanish? Just don't compare. Once again, go back to your plan, your goals, and just focus on your family dynamic and the way your child's going to be learning best. Because like I said, you just don't know what's going on in the other family, and why the other child's proficiency level might be higher. It's not really something you should do with your child. You don't want to discourage them from learning another language by comparing him or her to someone else. And that goes with like anything, honestly, like schooling and sports and things like that. It's the same thing. You don't want to compare your kiddo to another kiddo. And that brings me to striving for perfection. Like I said, language is not perfect. We shouldn't expect our child or our children to be perfect when it comes to language learning. I myself, I'm not a perfect bilingual. It's really hard to be a balanced bilingual. Our language proficiency is always fluctuating, depending on the needs of our environment. So let's say, for example, if I'm in an area that is mostly English dominant and I need English to communicate with peers and family, then in that situation, I might, be more dominant or more proficient in English. I'm not saying I'm going to lose my Spanish skills, but it just comes to show that our proficiency is constantly fluctuating throughout based on the environment that we're in. So, don't expect your child to be a perfectly balanced bilingual. And it's really rare to find people who are perfectly balanced. I don't think there's anyone I know that it has perfectly balanced proficiency. So, just keep that in mind. Don't strive for perfection. It's never too late to introduce the language, is the next tip. A lot of times I get questions from parents, indicating that they have a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, and, they want to introduce them to French or to German for the first time. And they're wondering whether that's even a good idea because the kiddo is 15, 16 years old. And I always say, it's never too late to introduce a language. How many times have, we've seen adults later in life that they go on to study a language in college and become fluent, and next thing you know, they're teaching the language. Anyone can learn a language or pick up a language at any age. It's a matter of consistency and dedication. So, I wouldn't get discouraged by your child's or your age if you're trying to, pick up on another language. And then lastly, don't give up. There will be ups and downs. Like I said, it's hard. Depending on your goal, I always like to say you really have to be consistent with it. And there will be times where you'll see later on, like your child might prefer the majority language and they're not using the home language as much anymore. And a big reason for that is, our world is constantly happening in English, especially here in the United States. Everything's in English: TV, movies, music, peer interaction, education. So essentially you're competing with the majority language at all times. And it's perfectly natural for your child to want to speak in the majority language because they're realizing that this is what's working best for them. You know, they're able to communicate best with lots of people in the majority language. So it's essentially your role to show your child that, you know, their world can also happen in the native language and the minority language as well. Or like, let's say, for example, like in Spanish, it's your pretty much job to show them that it's, you know, Spanish, for example, can also be fun, can also, you know, be just as entertaining by like watching movies and listening to music. You really just want to capture their interests in your language at home as well, so that they can be interested in learning it too. So just, you know, keep that in mind. And then lastly, and I know I'm going kind of fast, it's just I know this Insta story is probably going to be too long. But lastly, I just wanted to answer some of the questions that you guys have. I had posted a question box on my Insta story to leave it open to you guys on just questions you guys have about raising your children to be bilingual. And these are some of the top questions that I got. So the first one being, does bilingualism cause language delays? We know, you know, based off of lots of research that no, it does not. There's actually so many benefits and pros to being bilingual. And children who are bilingual are also expected to follow the same developmental milestones as monolingual children as well too. And then the next question is, can my autistic child be bilingual? And the answer to this is yes. We also see that based on research, children with language impairments can also be bilingual and communicate in other languages as well too. So this shouldn't stop you from exposing your child to your native language in this scenario as well. And then another question that was pretty common was, how can I motivate my child to speak his or her home language? So one of the biggest questions that I often get is, you know, my son doesn't want to speak Spanish anymore. Like, he only replies in English, and, you know, he's not interested in doing it. Like, he just refuses. And as I mentioned earlier, this is very common because, like I said, everything is just happening in the majority language, in English, friends and school and TV and games, and pretty much all of your child's interests are in English. You're competing with all of that. So I always tell parents, you know, try to find your child's interests in your home language too, and see if that also captures their interest, so that they can try to practice and communicate in the home language as well. So on the worksheet, there are other tips that I also included that can help you with this common, you know, barrier or challenge that, you know, parents kind of come across. You know, keep speaking your language, native language at home. Don't stop. Expand your network by finding friends and family that your child can communicate with in your home language as well too. Encourage friendships if possible in that language. And if your child is older, I always like to say, you know, make sure that you also talk to them about the benefits of being bilingual. If they're older, then they're totally capable of understanding why it's so important for your family, for your child to know another language. You know, that might also help too, to motivate them. You know, make sure you talk about those cultural, social, and educational and economic benefits of speaking another language if you do have an older child. And then lastly, how can I tell if my bilingual child has a language disorder or delay? So as always, if you're concerned about your child's development, make sure that you contact a speech-language pathologist to get him or her screened or evaluated. But just expect that a bilingual child will always follow the same language developmental milestones as a monolingual child. but this time you're considering 2 languages. So if you're counting your child's words to see how many words he has in his or her vocabulary, make sure you're counting the words in both languages as well, and making that the grand total. As always, if you guys are concerned that your child doesn't have enough words in both languages combined, then I would definitely seek a speech-language pathologist to get him or her evaluated. But always expect your kiddo, to be just following that developmental milestones as normal. And that is pretty much it, guys. That concludes my presentation. I know it was a lot of information that was going really fast, but it's really hard to stay within the time limits here on the Instagram story, so that's why I was kind of talking fast. But if you guys have more questions about raising your child to be bilingual, or just questions about bilingualism in general, please feel free to reach out, send me a message on Instagram, or go to my website at www.bilingualspeechie.com and send me a message. I have tons of resources that you can download for free on there, for parents and for educators as well. But thank you so much for tuning in today, and I appreciate you guys just all the time, of supporting me and just, chatting with me through my DMs about everything bilingualism, guys. So thank you, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.